So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlotte Regular Whitefield, and I am the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund Coordinator, short for OCRF. Today is going to be our second informational session for this current round of OCRF applications. And today is really here for your time and your questions. So the format for what we're going to go through is basically I will open up to the floor to see if there's any sort of overarching questions or kind of paths that you as the audience would like me to go down. I have gone through one of these webinars already, so if you're looking for kind of the nuts and the bolts hopefully of our application, hopefully you have been able to watch our recording. If not, I am more than happy to kind of go through that process again if that would be useful for you guys. As you just saw, this is recorded for today, so please be mindful. You are more than welcome to ask any sort of specific questions about your project or about your situation. Obviously, this is recorded and will be shared, so be mindful of that. And also, you are more than welcome to put information in the chat, either for the whole group, if you think it's something that would be really useful for multiple individuals to kind of think about, in addition to private chatting me, and we can stay on roughly till about 2 o'clock. I do have a hard stop then, but I can always make time in one-on-one meetings with anyone after the fact. So I think with that, I will pause and ask if anyone has anything that they would like to make sure that we cover. Otherwise, I can kind of start going through my normal overarching ideas of what the OCRF is, and maybe that will spur some questions. Please feel free if you have a, okay, overarching sounds great, perfect. So we will start there. So basically, let me see, by show of hands or reactions, your choice, how many of you have already or in the past submitted an OCRF application or are familiar, or at least familiar with what the OCRF is, so I can gauge at what level to start this? All right, seeing none, I am going to kind of start from the beginning, and hopefully this will be helpful for you. As I mentioned earlier, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Raise your hand, unmute your microphone, however really fits for you. And we are going to start out really with our OCRF website. Just give me 1 second. I want to make sure that this is okay. So at this point, hopefully you are seeing my screen. May I ask, let's see if I can ask someone, are you able to see my screen?
We can see it.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund was formed in early 2020, and it really is a new place for state funding for kind of the intersection of conservation and recreation. Our projects really are meant to be capacity building. They're very meant to be kind of initial pilot projects. So kind of how do you keep something going or start something new? And the reason we kind of couch our projects along these lines is because the maximum allowable amount for your project is $50,000. So these really are small projects and very much thought as catalysts to kind of continue or to start something. So the OCRF has been granting since 2020, and we are currently within our first RFP of, or second RFP of this year, as you can see in the first bucket here, which is our project overview. The current RFP opened on August 12th. We are currently entering our second, basically informational, and we will be closing our applications on October 7th. At this point, hopefully you have been able to kind of go online and see your application form, and I'll go through that in just a little bit. But it is important for us to make sure that individuals are aware of who can apply and who really is our target audience. I'm just going to go down And really, the purpose and really our intended audience for this application really are public and private not-for-profits. So these are community organization groups. It could be forms of government. We accept applications from local, tribal, state, federal governments, schools. So if you basically have to be a 501c3, public or a public or private not-for-profit. And we are a little bit strict about that. And also one thing to be clear is that when you are kind of applying for this, one of the new things that you do need to consider is that we've just put a cap on your overhead rate. So you are no longer allowed to ask for anything more than 20% on your overhead or your indirect or your administrative fees, basically depending on how you kind of refer to that within your organization. And these, as I said, are very much targeted at the overarching goal of the OCRF, which is conservation and recreation, and really that nexus of people and nature with people. And how would we bring Oregonians into that fold? And I do stress the idea of Oregonians because the OCRF is intended primarily for Oregon applicants. However, if your organization is outside of Oregon and all of your work is being done within Oregon, you are still eligible to apply. And if you have questions about the nuances of that, I am more than happy to talk with you more about that. But really, this is intended for work in Oregon, primarily by Oregon-based organizations. So with that, I do also want to, and we'll talk about this in the timeline or in our application, I do really want to stress outdoor equity and DEI is essential for all of our OCRF applications. That is regardless of if you are doing a conservation or a recreation project. And very much is going to be needed to include in your application as we go through. And apologies for that pause. I just read a question. So far, there is a question, the 20% of what capital figure? So I will answer that, and I might ask this individual to ask to make sure that I did answer it correctly. So this is 20% of your total project costs. And we do not kind of line item the differences between personnel cost or equipment costs or supplies costs. It's basically 20% of your total cost. And this, basically for us at the OCRF, I know this does change depending on the granting organization. Indirect costs are all those costs that you can't necessarily directly attribute to your project. An example that I often use is that we happily pay for personnel and often pay for a wide range of personnel. So if you're, for an example, executive director, if you are a traditional not-for-profit, works on the project itself, that personnel cost is actually not part of your administrative fees. That would actually be line itemed as a personnel cost. But if you are needing to pay for your executive director and they have nothing to do with the project past signing the original contract, that cost would be included within your indirect costs. Also, things that we include within your indirect costs are maintenance, basically maintenance fees of your organization. Like, how do you pay the rent for your building? How do you pay for office supplies and stuff like that, not directly associated with the project? Often accountants or payroll personnel are included in this. In addition, I'll talk about this later. We actually accept insurance fees as part of this 20% cap. Also, insurance can be line itemed out in a different section of our other budget. And it really does depend on if you needed new insurance for the project specifically, then it would be another object. If you have insurance and you just want to help subsidize the cost of it, it would go over your indirect cost. So I'm going to pause there and make sure that this actually makes sense to the individual asking. Great, thanks. And when in doubt, please ask us. We at the OCRF, it is not like an web application, NSF, NOAA, dependent on kind of what funding streams your organization normally looks at. We have a kind of a broad pen of how we can actually line item out our kind of budgets, but it is important that everyone understands this 20% cap is new. And if your organization needs an additional letter documenting this new restriction, I do, without purposely kind of pointing, most universities may need this because their overhead rates tend to be much higher. We can provide you additional documentation to show that this is the highest rate that we would accept. And that is regardless of if your organization has a pre-existing cooperative agreement or other form of documentation that normally would be used for a larger rate. So with that, I might pause and see if there is any questions that maybe were spurred by that, and then maybe walk through our application to help people. Okay, hearing none, let's go to the application. This might help. So I'm going to start out basically saying, we acknowledge here at the OCRF this application is being extremely finicky, and unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it now. I highly, highly recommend that when you are ready, if you choose to apply to the OCRF, go online and kind of thumb through the application. And either you can actually do print the application, which there's a function for you to kind of do a print as a PDF, or email me and I can send you a PDF copy of this application. Work offline. Do not work within the application. A lot of people are getting very odd glitches in this application, unfortunately. And I don't want anyone to lose information. So I'll say this again, and I'll also write this down just so that everyone clearly knows. Work offline, then copy and paste your application materials online into this place. So if you've applied before, you'll see that there are some changes to our application that are very similar but slightly different. We do encourage applicants that if you've applied in the past, to feel free to reapply. We do not mind you to reapply to us as long as you've addressed any of the comments and questions that were provided to you in your review feedback. And also, don't feel that you have to reinvent the wheel per se when you reapply. Use what you have and then edit that based on the feedback that you received. That should help you kind of move through this application and not have to necessarily rewrite all of your sections, because we don't want you spending time on that. We want you spending time readdressing things that we at the OCRF were looking for. So I'm going to go section by section. It's a little bit weedy, but hopefully this will help. As I've said before, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a specific question. So the first part of this application really is just the nuts and the bolts of who you are, who is your organization. We do distinguish between the primary applicant and the lead organization. An example of that would be the primary applicant, and if I was applying, would be myself. The lead organization would be Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We need to make sure that we have contact information for both. So if you have a personal email within your organization and then kind of a additional email, either your executive director or general information email, make sure you provide all of that contacts. It helps us moving forward to communicate better if we have two different abilities to reach you, especially also that we have staff, often have a lot of staff turnover within our grantees, that we always want to make sure that we can contact multiple people at said organization. So that's just basically the difference between your lead organization is basically who you work for. Primary applicant is yourself or whoever is applying within your organization. So the next thing is really about project logistics, and this is basically your timeline for your project. And this is going to be really important for you to note. Basically, what we really want to know here is what is your start date? Your project cannot start before March 1st of 2023. This is very important because the OCRF review process and award process is lengthy. because of the contracting and the multiple levels of technical and project review that we go through. And I can explain some of that moving forward. So do not have your project start any earlier than March 1st of 2023. At the OCRF, we really do expect projects to be completed within 2 years. If for some reason you are a field-based project or you have other sort of time restrictions where you need to have a project go past January 1st of 2025, email me prior to the submission of your proposal and we can discuss that. No project with an end date after January 1st of 2025 will be reviewed and considered unless you contact myself as the OCRF coordinator prior to this. This is very, very important for us just to make sure that we know why you have that extension and why you did not necessarily fill out the application as instructed. We have made and will continue to make exceptions. This is not necessarily end all for your project. It's just very important for us to know why you would need to go further than this. And if for some reason your project, if your project is awarded and for some reason it would need an extension, we do have the capability of providing extensions to you. So don't preemptively think you would need that. Just if that came up, if awarded, we can deal with that after the fact. But if you know for a fact you have to have a project longer than this, contact us. And project location, this is really important for us, mainly because projects at the OCRF really, we aim to have them balanced across our ecoregions, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. So we want to know where's your project, what human populations is it closest to, and which ecoregions is it in? And this question specifically kind of helping us orient you to where with the human communities it's located. Okay, so project overview, very similar nuts and bolts. Project title, please have it be descriptive but short, just so that we know what you're after. A couple words up to no more than 10, so just have it be concise. Project abstract, this is a little bit new, hopefully something that you have seen before in other applications. Very much we want it concise, but we want it to be standalone. If your project is awarded, this would be what we actually use to help describe your project to our funding organizations. So basically where we at the OCRF kind of receive our funds from, primarily the Oregon legislature. So basically say, what are you trying to do? How are you going to do it? Why do you need to do it? And what would be your outcomes? Traditional abstract formats. So project objectives, measures of success, and project timeline. These are really, really important. So please take the time to actually think through these the most that you can. Many of our projects that are submitted actually are larger than just what is being proposed to the OCRF, because we tend to be the smaller amounts of money for some of these projects. If your project, the beginning to end is multi-phased or beginning to end is larger than $50,000, that's perfectly fine. We want to know what is the whole project and then how does OCRF fit into that. So list out your objectives, but clearly note, say like objective 1, 2, and 3 would be paid for by the OCRF. Objective 4 and 5 would be paid by other funds. Kind of an example for this, generalized example would be, if you want to build a brand new playground in a community, the steps to that, and you haven't started yet. First, you need to do kind of a community survey. What are the needs for the community for a playground? Where do they want to have it? Then you would need to kind of do some planning. What is the locations? Then you would basically, and what are the locations and how much would it cost? So those would be 2 objectives. Obviously have them more clear than that. This is just an example. And then you would have a build phase and a kind of a celebration to the community. So if you have all kind of 4 of those example objectives that I just talked about, make sure you say, okay, OCRF will help pay for the initial community surveys and some of the scoping. Then we're going to need other funds from somewhere else to pay for those other objectives. So those would be kind of other funded objectives. The same for measures of success. Use your objectives that you line itemed out and clearly talk about how do you know when it's completed? And then the last part of this is project timeline. When would each of those objectives be completed by? So we really are hoping that these three different questions kind of mirror each other, where you would be able to kind of look at your objectives, then the next thing, by looking at your objectives, know exactly how you would measure success for each of those, then what is the timeline for each of those? And I'm going to pause and ask if this makes sense before I continue, or if there's any questions. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to continue. Hopefully everyone is still with me.
That was helpful. Thank you. I recognize how it feels talking to empty spaces. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. So hopefully, as I said, I know it's lunchtime, so maybe some of you guys are eating your lunch or multitasking, and I'm happy for you to do that. So, but just interrupt if I am kind of not making sense. So project narrative, this is really important. This is where it is a little bit different than we have in the past. First thing I want to note here is we use approximate word counts. We do not want you wasting your time counting your words. That is not important to us. But this is supposed to give you a rough idea of, we really don't want more than this because it shouldn't take you more than this to describe your project. If your project is that big that it needs more, like multi-millions of dollars, we're probably not your funding source, and perfectly honest. So we really do want your projects to be able to kind of fit within the scope of description. So project background, what is the issue you're trying to address and why does it matter? This is basically setting the stage. Why should we care what you're doing? Of course, we care about all of what you're doing, but help articulate that to us. Project implementation plan. So first you got us to care. How are you going to do this? And this is similar. This is where basically you take your project objectives, which should be kind of clear bullets, and you describe more of how are you going to do this? Where are you going to do this? Why are you going to do this? And things like that. Project partners. I cannot emphasize this enough. We really are looking for projects that are community driven, in communities of place, communities of practice, communities of governance. It can be multiple levels. And it really is about who else is going to work with you to complete something. And we really want you to be as specific as possible for who is going to be your project partner. An example that I've seen a lot is a lot of projects say a project partner is going to be the local school district. That's fine. That's a great project partner, but you need to list who at the local school district are you going to work with? What is the name of the local school district? What role are they going to be playing? And that really helps show the commitment of the project partner. Once again, measures of outdoor equity. Outdoor equity really is a very wide lens for the OCRF. We just want to make sure you think about how do you connect people and places to your work, and really think about that of how do you break barriers down? How do you build metaphorical bridges? How do you incorporate people who have not been incorporated in the past? That said, oftentimes we get a lot of questions of, we're doing restoration in a really sensitive area. We don't want people there. And that makes perfect sense. And I do see a raised hand. I will be to you in just 1 second and hopefully answer your question. But I do want to say that outdoor equity is not necessarily physical boots on the ground in an area, although it can be and it should be in some instances. Sometimes it is bringing the knowledge out of the sensitive area to the people. So you can do very sensitive field work and not do a community science based, but then hold workshops and share sessions or all sorts of informationals or teaching things after to share the information so that you're sensitive to the community of plants and animals you're working for, but serving the community of humans at the same time. So I'm going to pause. I do see a hand, and with my format, I can't tell who exactly it is. So please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, I just noticed on this application that with under the measures of outdoor equity, those sentences aren't complete on the application. Does that change if we're viewing it ourselves, or like where can we see the remainder of those measures?
So on your version, once you sign in, you should be able to see all of that. And let me
Okay.
see if I'm in an edit version. So as I said, these are horribly worded. I'm going to would it be helpful I read them out right now, or are you able to see this?
No, that's fine. I was just wanting to make sure that within the version we work with, we'd be able to see that.
Yes, you should be able to see it completely. As I said, unfortunately, I am in a very odd version of this right now, so you're not able to see all of it.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I see one chat. Ooh, Molly is giving me assistance. Let's see. All right. So apologies, I'm going to try to get through this and see if we can show you all of that. There is also scoring criteria on the website. Thank you for that, Brian. You should be able to see all that. And there you go. Are you able to, you should be able to see all of those now.
We can, yeah, thank you.
Perfect. All right.
I have a quick question regarding the equity piece as well. So some of the relationships that we're building with communities, they're still developing, and we know that we want to work together. We just don't know what that looks like yet. And given the timeline of this work, I'm wondering if there's timeline of the work as relates to the time frame of the RFP. But over the next basically summer 2023 and on to beginning of 2024. I guess I'm curious if there's built-in flexibility to say, like, we have this partner, we know we want to work together, we just don't know exactly what that looks like yet.
So I would say there is flexibility there. So if your project partner is committed, so as you just described, you want to work together and they want to work with you, but you need, as you said, describe a little bit and work together figuring out what that is, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Then I would actually put one of your objectives is to explore your partnership.
Okay, thank you.
And sometimes that makes sense. So if you're doing a very community-based project where really it is human focused and how humans interact with nature, and an example would that be is you have a project partner, you really want to run an outdoor camp. You don't know exactly what the camp's going to be a little bit, but you know what the goals and objectives are. Project partner exploration can be objective there. But if you're doing very much like a conservation minded project and you know exactly what science you want to do on the back end and your project partner's there to help disseminate information, that might be a little bit more questionable that you haven't figured out what your project partnership is there, just because that is such a kind of a key aspect.
That makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions about this before we move forward? Okay, great. And thank you all for some of the help on the IT. Hopefully, let's see. And then the last thing is project justification. This is really where we want you to describe what you're doing for the outdoor equity piece. So as you can see above, really the 4 different questions about, is this part of your outdoor equity concept? Now explain how you are going to address those within your project. And that's really, really critical. As you see on your scoring rubric, and I'll pull that up in a minute, this really is somewhere we want you to look at and really think about. All right, so this kind of comes into some more of the questionnaire aspect of the project proposal. Really, those other 4 questions, really kind of the meat and potatoes of the proposal. So geographic, region, and ecoregions, we really want to know where you're doing your work. If you need help figuring out what are these ecoregions, you can click the link there and see a map. If you're doing more than one area, click the areas that apply. Also, we really are looking for projects that kind of span between conservation and recreation. Don't automatically, unless you really are doing even mix, thinking that's going to help you. will basically fund straight conservation with a recreation lens, or straight recreation with a little bit of a conservation lens. Like, it all depends on what your project is. So kind of gradate accordingly here. This is a new question, but it really does help us from a monitoring standpoint. We really kind of want to think about, what is your project? Are you monitoring, doing research, community engagement? Click all that apply. Same as below here, these really align very much with the Oregon Conservation Recreation original bill by the Oregon legislature, and really helps kind of have us sort, like, what about conservation or what about recreation are you addressing? Lastly, what if your project is kind of conservation priorities, what are you going to touch on? All projects should really touch on something. Even if you are basically taking individuals out into nature. I mean, you'll see birds, you'll see plants. So think about kind of what are you really kind of looking at. And then these are just some more kind of nuts and bolts questions. Conservation opportunity areas. If you need a description of what that is, you can click there. Priority species list. Once again, take a look at our species list. Really, the OCRF is very focused at the Oregon Conservation Strategy, as you can see, and have information here, and also outdoor equity. And you'll see on our website, we also have a link to the state recreation plan. And one question I do want to make sure that I draw your attention to is, does your project address aspects of drought or wildfire? And really, this is important for a couple of reasons. Drought and wildfire is really, really important for the state. Many of our projects are actually addressing aspects of it or thinking about aspects of it within their projects. We want to know about that and capture that information in your proposal. Also, the OCRF has received a large sum of money as part of our funding package for drought preparedness and restoration aspects. That said, if your project does not deal with drought or wildfire, it's okay. That does not affect your scoring whatsoever. What this does is it helps us identify the projects that have the nexus and also help us allocate funding that we have internally. Please don't click this unless your project does have a nexus and that you have already articulated this nexus within your project justification and also background. So important information, but this is not scored. So just click yes or no and make sure that if you do click yes, it is basically shown within your background and justification of how. So project budget. Maybe I'll pause there and see if there's any questions before I kind of dig into the budget. Okay, hearing none. So requested funds, remember this, you're only allowed a maximum of $50,000. These are very much small projects. Total project cost, this is basically how much cost would it take to do the whole project? This is not implying OCRF will provide you additional funds, but this is just helping us understand what is the total cost if you have a project larger than just OCRF. So we understand that maybe OCRF is helping with phase 1, but then you have phase 2, or OCRF does phase 1 and 2, and then you have 3 and 4. However, it really fits within your project. Total matching funds. This is basically, we want to know, what are you requesting from the OCRF? How much would your total project cost? If your total project is $16,000 and you requested $16,000 from the OCRF, we don't really need you to show any match. We have no minimum match requirements. This match question really is there to help us understand how reasonable your project is if you have a large project. For an example, if you're asking for $50,000 from us, your whole project costs $200,000, but you really have no match. That's where budgetarily and budget justification, it's a little bit, it will be important for you to talk about how are you going to complete the project if you don't have additional funds in hand. We do not expect you to have all your funds if you have a very large project. We do want to know what have you raised, just so that we can think about feasibility. And once again, matching funds are not required even for those large projects, but they do help show the feasibility and the doability of your project, basically. Budget categories, basically administration and indirect, that's your 20% cap, remember. Contract services, that's basically, are you going to kind of hire someone else out of your grant to help? A prime example is a lot of our projects do tree maintenance. So if you get a grant from us, but then you have to hire an arborist, that would be a contract service. Or you get a grant from us and you need to contract a construction company, that would be a contract services. Equipment, these are non-consumable items more than $1,000. Really think prime examples of these usually are scientific equipment, kind of large reusable things, not a one and done or a couple times and done. Personnel, obviously anyone that's actively working on your project. Supplies, materials, food. This is basically your consumables. So what are you going to kind of use up in the course of your project? First, your equipment. Travel, we do travel, obviously. We do not want, how do I phrase this? The OCRF does not tend to and is not our primary interest to fund any sort of travel out of state. Actually, we've never funded out of state travel. I state this is because often some of our conservation projects are very research oriented. And if you wanted to have money to go to a conference, we do not pay for that. We pay for travel within the state for direct project needs. If you want to necessarily, if you're from Bend and you want to do outreach in Portland and you have a project partner and a justifiable kind of reason for that, that would be a information kind of or travel for informational purposes that would be allowable. We do not pay for conference fees unless there's a really good explanation of why. We will pay for some educational fees. So if you need to train someone to do something on the project, contact me and we can discuss it, but that might be an allowable expense. And other is basically kind of what doesn't fit within these categories, and then you will have to explain what it is in the next section. And insurance costs are one of these. All of our projects with the OCRF do require basic insurance, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And we do acknowledge that insurance is expensive, and for small organizations, insurance can actually be a barrier. So we highly encourage you to budget insurance costs. If you need help figuring out what those costs would be, I can help. I cannot direct you to an insurance broker as a program coordinator, but what I can do is kind of have you reach out to some of our past project awardees and kind of they can help guide you a little bit, dependent on what you would need for budgetary purposes. So breakdown of OCRF funds. Remember, this is basically how are these categories going to be broken down for what we are going to be providing you? And then if you have match, how does your match break down into these categories for what other organizations provide you? Last thing is the in-kind support. Sometimes there's support that really you can't put necessarily a dollar value on it. This usually is like volunteer hours or donated used equipment or kind of piggybacking off of a contract that's pre-existing. Basically, what do you have in hand that you're leveraging that can't be necessarily equated to dollars as match? And that's where we would want to kind of think about describing that briefly here. Now, are there any questions about budget before I move on? Okay, hearing none, I will move on. So applicant track record. Basically, we just want to know, have you or your lead organization received an OCRF grant before? Have you contacted ODFW or other natural resource educational or kind of other managers about your project? This really is important for us to make sure that if you are doing a conservation-minded project, you've reached out to either regional staff to see how does this meet regional needs, or water staff at EPA or DEQ, or any sort of kind of how do you connect to your communities, and how is your project kind of coordinating with other efforts in the area. So this is really, we are looking for brief name, kind of who did you contact, where are they from, emails if you have them. So provide examples of past completed work or skills needed. This is important to note that I am not looking for CVs, so curriculum vitae or resumes here of your individual people. I'm really wanting to know what have you or your organization done as projects to help build up to this, or similar projects where you've already done skills that are needed for this. An example of this would be if you are wanting to build a trail system. Has your organization, or have you built trails before? Can you provide examples of those trails that you've built? Or if you haven't built trails before, you've partnered necessarily with an organization that has, so someone knows how to do that. So this is really just explain what information and needs and skills do you need to do your project, and have you kind of gotten the right people at the table. There's multiple ways you can kind of frame this. I kind of defer to the applicant on the best way that they kind of want to do this, but I do not want just copied and pastes of people's resumes or CVs here. It's just not going to be necessarily very helpful. Also, last is a bulleted list or short description of online materials. There is no ability to attach files or send additional information past this application. So if you have any sort of websites or PDFs online or photos online that you would want considered with your application, please put a very short kind of what is the information you want to provide and a link to that website. Are there any questions about this before we move on to the last section? Okay, none. So this is our last section, and this is really grant administration considerations. Nothing on this last section affects your ability to get a grant other than the making sure that you list your federal tax ID number. And I see one hand that went up, and I will address that in just 1 second. I do want to stress that if you do not include your federal tax ID number, or if you do not have a federal tax ID number, you are likely not eligible to apply. So this is a really, really important field to fill in. And if you cannot provide one, your application will not be reviewed. So I will pause, and I do see a hand, so I invite whoever raised their hand to feel free to ask their question.
Yeah, so going back to the previous section where you were talking about online materials and photos and things like that, can links to items, we can include links, or just a description is plenty?
That's your discretion. I would encourage links if you have them, mainly just because it allows us to go and see what you're referencing.
Okay.
But I would say don't provide a link unless you basically tell us what it is.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions about the previous section before we go into this last one, and then I'll open it up for questions? All right, hearing none. So yes, this is our last section. Remember, you must have a federal tax ID number to be able to apply. If you don't or do not fill in this this field, your application most likely will not be reviewed. So basically, is your organization a public entity? You most likely would know if you are one, but this tends to be governments, government-ran universities, public, not all public universities, but most public universities, most public educational groups, things like that. Will your project be conducted adjacent to to publicly owned land. Once again, this is just for contracting purposes. We need to know this information. Provide the names or the entities of who owns the land. If you don't know this, that's okay. You can kind of put to be determined. That would be a case in which you know you want to go camping, but you haven't picked out like where you're going to go camping. That would be an example. But if you're doing restoration work, you really should know what land and who owns it that the restoration is being done on. So answer this the best that you can. An incomplete answer is not going to affect your application. We do really need to know if your project has permits in place, and if basically, do you know if you need permits, and if you do you have them in place? This really helps to make sure that your project's going to be done within that 2-year time frame. Next section is a pretty long list of basically, are you going to? And this really does help with us to base your insurance levels on. It's a risk analysis, basically, like, are you going to be doing ATVs? Are you going to be swimming? Are you going to be in boats? Are you going to be flying airplanes? Things like that. Working with live animals, really important ones. So make sure you kind of think about that. And we will ask this again as if your project is awarded, but just this helps us on the front end figuring out. Remember, even if this would be very unlikely, even if you put yes all the way across the board on these questions, that does not affect your scoring. We do not mind if you do these activities. This just helps us process a grant contract faster. By knowing this up front, we are able to process you faster. Last thing is basically types of insurance, workers' comp. Do you have general liability, automotive liability? Hitting no to these does not make a difference to how we score you. It just helps us process your application, get you lined up if you are awarded to get these faster. Important question. Does your organization need additional assistance getting these? Basically, do you already have them? No, I don't have them, but I was able to budget them in, or no, my organization most likely needs some additional assistance. We have some additional funds at the OCRF to above and beyond the grant allowance to help with insurance. We do not want insurance to be a barrier. Good insurance makes good fundamental projects and helps with the kind of capacity of your organization. So if your project's already maxed out at 50,000, but you still really need insurance because your organization doesn't have it, click this no button, and that does not affect your scoring. But what it does do is it flags us to know that regardless of how your project scores, we might need to assist you further to make sure we get that insurance so that you can do the good work that you proposed. And this will be done on a case-by-case basis. So please try to budget your insurance costs into your project if you don't carry it already. Last question is just conflict of interest. This is really important. If you have a conflict of interest, we want to make sure that you declare it. That's either a conflict of interest with our advisory board or specifically the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Conflict of interest is your family member or direct neighbor is an OCRF board member. That does not exclude you, but we need to know. Or your business partner is an ODFW commissioner. Not necessarily excludes you, but we need to know this. The state of Oregon has a very detailed list of what is conflict of interest. We encourage you to go to the Department of Administrative Services and look up what that would be. So, and kind of think about what would declare a conflict of interest. Basically, we need you to fill out this question to the best of your ability, and then explain why it is you consider it as a conflict of interest or you declared it as a conflict of interest. Each application, this question will be reviewed, and we will kind of check if there is a conflict of interest. You chatting with an ODFW personnel member about your project, ODFW being on your project, those are all great things. So don't think that excludes you by any stretch. We just need to kind of know what's going on. Many of our projects absolutely do have ODFW as a project partner, and we highly encourage you to do that. But what we do need to do is just say, in this example, just click, does your primary applicant or lead organization have a known or perceived conflict of interest with ODFW? If it's just a project partner from a local bio, you can actually hit no. That is not a conflict of interest, but it would be a conflict of interest if you have more of a financial or personal connection with someone that you know full well is part of the OCRF grading. So one of our ODFW commissioners, hypothetically, if any of you knew me, you would hit yes. I don't believe I know any of you, so that would not be an example here. Or if you had a connection directly with one of our OCRF advisory committees members. If when in doubt, just contact us or just hit yes and write whatever you think might be. And if it's not, we don't mind. We can just very easily see that. So I see one hand up, so I might pause there and hopefully I haven't confused everyone.
Yeah. Hi, yeah, I'm looking at the question that's towards the top of the screen. It's talking about prepayment contracts. Is
Yes.
that to potentially help organizations with cash flow rather than, I was gonna ask if the grant is reimbursement based. It was at the top of the screen. It was when you were scrolled down, it was on the screen. It was right above what you were just talking about.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Apologies.
No worries. Yeah, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it was like third from the bottom.
Okay. Apologies for anyone getting motion sick here.
Right
Nice.
after insurance, keep going. There we go. Would the primary applicant and or lead organization require a prepayment contract?
Yeah, so that's a great question to pull out, and apologies for me skipping over that. So the OCRF is primarily set up as a reimbursement-based system, which means that you as the applicant, if awarded, would basically pay up front for most of your supplies or whatever you need, and then submit receipts. In this reimbursement system, traditionally, what we would do is you can submit them monthly, you can submit them quarterly, you can submit them all at the end, however works for your group. But we acknowledge many groups don't have the cash flow, as you just stated and kind of implied for some issues. And we do acknowledge some organizations, to get your work done and to give you that capacity, need an upfront payment. We can do upfront payments. We can do upfront payments up to 90% of what your request is. So we would, even for an upfront payment, we would kind of hold back 10% until the end of the project when we receive your grant report. So this is really important, once again, for contracting, that if you think like, wow, you know, we could do this project, but we can't pay for all of our supplies to start it until we have that money. Hit yes, I would need an upfront payment, and that does not affect your scoring at all.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So that is the end of the application. I'm going to go very briefly and just want to draw your attention to the scoring criteria. I'm not going to go through this in the same level of detail, but I do want to make sure that you see this is what the scoring will look like from our ODF or from our OCRF advisory members. So once your proposal comes in the door, there's 2 levels of scoring and 2 levels of approval. And that's why it takes so long to actually get these from beginning to end. All projects come in and they are reviewed for technical purposes from our ODFW staff. Basically, if it's science-based, we hand it to our science staff. If it's recreation-based, we hand it to our information technology staff. We also have individuals from Department of State Lands that reviews it for a recreational standpoint. So everything is reviewed first, kind of for the nuts and the bolts of it, and you don't get a hard score from those. But they also kind of use this and think about different questions or comments they might have. So those technical reviews are then given to our OCRF advisory members, which use the scoring rubric as you see put in front of you. And they will actually give you a numerical score. You will have at least 2 OCRF advisory members review your proposal. Sometimes it will be 3, and we are aiming for 3. And between the 3 of them, they will each go through this. And then we'll go through a series of different kind of evaluations, basically, to make sure that we even out these and use the final ranking. Basically, a way to kind of, without getting into the numbers and the way that we do this per se, is that because you have 3 individuals, everyone's score is a tiny bit different. We even out what your scores would be based on the fact you have a couple. We average them, and then we compare all projects against each other using their kind of their standardized scores. And then basically you fall out within the whole group, regardless of if you're conservation or if you're recreation, based on these scores from the advisory members. And then at the end, what we do is we look at the whole suite of how things scored and make sure that we at the OCRF are balancing geographic regions, purpose of projects, and kind of arrange things from there so that we have a full suite of diversity of what's going on with what our funding package is. Once that kind of list of fundable projects is set forth, the OCRF advisory members as a whole will vote on the package. That will then go to the ODFW commission to be voted on, and then projects would be awarded. So that is the end of that. I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully go back. So question of, can we direct you to a Word or PDF of the application? So I believe that's been updated on our website. If not, please email me, and I'm going to drop my email in the chat right now, and I will make sure that we send that to you right away, and I will double check our website if it's been updated. It should have been by this point, but possibly not. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, hi Charlotte, Kellen again from the Wetlands Conservancy. Can you clarify, do ODF staff do the technical review regardless of conservation or recreation, or was there a separate entity doing the recreation review?
So that's an excellent question. It depends on what the project is. So we will have, so ODFW has our individuals specialized in recreation, but obviously our capacity is limited. So we also do have individuals from the Oregon Department of State Lands, specifically the Office of Outdoor Recreation, that reviews as well.
And then, sorry, quick follow-up to that. Is it fair to say that the question in the application where you answer, is this more of a conservation project with a little bit of a recreation emphasis, does that determine where your technical review goes?
It is the first level that I use for sorting, yes.
Okay.
So I basically will look at that and kind of sort it out, but then our technical staff will kind of read it and they're like, well, they might have marked it this, but I really think it should go over here. And sometimes we actually have one project that has both so evenly that it gets double reviewed. So it's not a problem to do that.
Okay, thank you.
And a question, are you the appropriate contact person to discuss a potential extended project timeline? Yes, please email me. You can use the email that I dropped in there or the email on our website. Both will reach me. I manage both accounts. Are there any other questions that I can help people with today?
I might have one. Yeah. I know that the conservation opportunity areas, I believe that they were in the guidelines and stuff like that. What about projects that take place like very, very close, like a stone's throw away from one of those polygons on the map? Would that be worth mentioning in our application? I'm assuming we should still mark it as no, but does that strengthen the application?
It does. I would say use your best judgment of what you refer to as a stone's throw away. If it is a couple miles and within reason, I would actually still click that button of saying yes, but clearly say in your application that it is directly adjacent.
Okay, I mean less than a mile away, so that's good to know.
Yeah, I would say yes, technically, and then explain in your application that. Because once again, that button does not necessarily get graded, but it helps us sort, and it does help with our relevance of kind of who do you get as a technical reviewer and how that necessarily kind of we evaluate your project.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, so thank you guys so much for being on today's call. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. Remember, applications close October 7th. They will close at midnight. I'm not going to go in at exactly midnight, but please, I can see your timestamp, so don't push that too much. And otherwise, reach out if you have questions, and I hopefully will see an application for most of you. So good luck. And if you need me to review anything, I'm more than happy to review. I do not technical review any of your applications for the sheer fact that allows me to actually kind of help you through the process. So I will not be a technical reviewer or actually a project reviewer for that exact purpose. So excellent. Well, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.